So today we're talking about something that, for my money, represents one of the strangest dead ends in drag racing history. This is the story of the Speed Sport 4 and Dale Grantham's Turbine car, two machines that came closer to cracking the 200-mile-per-hour barrier than just about anything else running in 1962, and then disappeared so completely that nobody knows where they are today. Not the cars, not the parts, nothing. Now, if you're looking for the quick rundown on turbine dragsters, there are faster videos out there. What I'm going to do here is take you through the whole thing, the people behind it, the engineering that made it work, and the disaster that killed the program before it could prove what it was really capable of. By the time we're done, you're going to know everything there is to know about drag racing's most ambitious experiment with compressed air. You've been warned. Before we get into the turbine cars, we have to talk about who these guys were and why anybody should have taken them seriously in the first place. Because here's the thing, in 1961, if three engineers walked up to you at a drag strip and said they wanted to build a car powered by aircraft starter turbines and compressed air, you'd probably laugh them off, unless you were the Speed Sport team. And the reason you wouldn't laugh them off is because the Speed Sport team had already proven they knew what they were doing. Gary Greth, Lyle Fisher, and Don Maynard were childhood friends from Tucson, Arizona. They'd been drag racing together since high school, and by 1957, they were running a car called the Speed Sport Roadster, though everybody called it Old Noisy. That name tells you something right there. This was a rear-engine machine with a 331 cubic inch Chrysler Hemi and 6 carburetors hanging off it. Not exactly subtle. In 1957, Old Noisy set the world record at 169.11 miles per hour at the ATAA World Series. Let that sink in for a second. These weren't weekend warriors. These were guys who'd already held a world record. When somebody with that kind of track record listens to your crazy idea instead of walking away, it means your crazy idea might not be so crazy after all. So, in May of 1961, 3 engineers from Garrett Air Research in Phoenix showed up at an Arizona drag strip. Their names were Don Hettinger, Cal Sensen, and John Brown. Now, Garrett Air Research, that name might ring a bell. These were the turbocharger people. They built the turbo system for the 1962 Oldsmobile Jetfire, which was a big deal at the time. They also manufactured turboprop aviation engines and all kinds of aerospace hardware. This wasn't some garage operation with big dreams. This was serious industrial muscle. The pitch they made to the Speed Sport crew went something like this. Aircraft engine starter motors, the pneumatic turbines that spin up commercial jet engines before ignition, could theoretically produce enough power to compete with top fuel dragsters. Not jet thrust, not afterburner flames shooting out the back, actual mechanical drive to the wheels through reduction gears, just like a conventional car. I love this part, because you can imagine the conversation. Greth and his guys are standing there, they've got a world record under their belts, and these aerospace engineers are telling them they want to bolt aircraft hardware onto a dragster and see if compressed air can beat nitromethane. And instead of telling them to get lost, the Speed Sport team said yes. Garrett Air Research agreed to fund the entire project and handle all the publicity. That's a pretty sweet deal when you think about it. Full corporate backing from an aerospace company that actually knew what they were doing with turbines. Now, we have to take a quick detour here to understand why turbines were such a big deal in the early 60s. I know, but this matters. The early 1960s were peak turbine optimism. Everywhere you looked, somebody was trying to put a turbine in something. Chrysler was developing what became the Chrysler turbine car in 1963. Andy Granatelli would nearly win the Indianapolis 500 with a turbine car in 1967. The aerospace industry was booming, military surplus jet engines were available cheap, and the future looked like it belonged to turbine power. The advantages seemed obvious. Turbines have an insane power-to-weight ratio. A starter turbine weighing 35 pounds could generate 750 pound-feet of torque. Try getting that out of a 35-pound piston engine. You can't. The simplicity was appealing too. Fewer moving parts than a traditional engine, which theoretically meant higher reliability. But here's the catch, and this is where the Speed Sport program got interesting. Most of the turbine cars you've heard about, the Walt Arfons jet car, Romeo Palamedes' series of untouchables, those were thrust cars. They pushed air out the back to create forward motion, pure spectacle. What Garrett Air Research wanted to build was a true turbine dragster, one that mechanically drove the wheels through gears. That's a completely different animal. Walt Arfons had introduced the first jet engine dragster on August 6, 1960. By summer of 1961, he was running mid-7 seconds quarters. The NHRA responded by banning jet-powered cars in November 1961. But a wheel-driven turbine car, that was something else entirely. That was competing on the same terms as everybody else, or at least that was the theory. Okay, back to Arizona. Our story begins in earnest in late 1961 when the Speed Sport team started building the Speed Sport 4. The propulsion system they came up with was unlike anything out there. Instead of burning fuel in a combustion turbine like a jet engine, the car used 3 aircraft jet engine starter turbines arranged in a triangular layout. These turbines were designed to spin up commercial jet engines before ignition, basically air-powered motors that wound the big fans up to speed so the jet could fire. Each turbine unit weighed just 35 pounds, but produced 750 pound-feet of torque when fed enough air pressure. They spun at up to 70,000 RPM. The turbines connected through splined output shafts to a chain drive, then through reduction gears to a Ford truck rear axle. The chassis had a 115-inch wheelbase with a 1937 Willys front end. Now here's where they brought in some serious talent. The aerodynamic body was hand-formed by Eddie Kuzma, who had built Indianapolis 500 winning cars. The paint job came from Dean Jeffries, the legendary customizer. These weren't names you threw around lightly. When Kuzma and Jeffries signed on to a project, people paid attention. But the problem from day one was weight, and this is the part that nearly killed the whole project before it got started. The air had to come from somewhere, and storing enough compressed air to power 3 turbines through a quarter mile required serious tank capacity. The original pressure tanks they used were oblong and weighed 450 pounds each. When you added everything up, the Speed Sport 4 tipped the scales at over 2,200 pounds. That's massive. For comparison, a competitive top fuel car of that era weighed somewhere around 1,500 pounds. So you've got all this exotic aerospace hardware, 3 turbines making crazy torque numbers, and the whole thing weighs as much as a small truck. That's not a recipe for going fast. The breakthrough came when the team got their hands on 4 spherical pressure tanks from Lockheed. These had been salvaged from some electrically powered aircraft project that never went anywhere. The spherical tanks were dramatically lighter than the originals, and swapping them in cut 700 pounds from the car. That's a huge number. Suddenly, they were in the ballpark. But there was another problem nobody had anticipated. When high-pressure air expands rapidly, which is exactly what happens when you're feeding it through turbines at 70,000 RPM, the temperature drops dramatically. The expanding air got so cold it was affecting the turbine performance. The solution they came up with was adding a combustor, essentially a constant flame with a spark plug firing 25 times per second, that heated the expanding air to 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit before it hit the turbines. Think about that for a second. They'd started with a purely pneumatic system, compressed air spinning turbines, and ended up with a hybrid of compressed air and combustion turbine technology. They were inventing this stuff as they went. Development through early 1962 was rough. The team kept breaking axles. The air volume calculations weren't quite right. Standard dragster parts weren't designed for the kind of forces a turbine system generated. Every run was an experiment, and a lot of those experiments ended with broken hardware. But on June 17, 1962, Red Greth climbed into the Speed Sport 4 and ran 8.75 seconds at 161 miles per hour. Now, I want you to understand what that number means. In 1962, the quickest top fuel cars were running in the high 7s and low 8s, and 8.75 at 161 wasn't going to win any championships, but it was competitive. It proved the concept worked. A car powered by compressed air and aircraft starter turbines could hang with nitromethane burning V8s, and they were just getting started. In July of 1962, the Speed Sport 4 showed up at Cordova, Illinois. On one pass, the car hit 189 miles per hour. That's 12 miles faster than the top speed at the June run. The problem was the turbines shut down about 200 feet before the timing lights, so the official number didn't reflect what the car was actually capable of. But 189 miles per hour in the quarter mile in 1962 for a wheel-driven car? That was serious. That was within spitting distance of 200 miles per hour, a barrier that the conventional top fuel guys were still chasing.
In an October 1962 interview with Drag News, Greth and Fisher acknowledged that they needed a lighter car to crack 200. The Speed Sport 4, even with the Lockheed tanks, was still too heavy to get there, but they were already working on a solution. This is where Dale Grantham enters the story. Grantham was a Phoenix-based touring pro who'd been making a name for himself on the Arizona circuit. On May 20th, 1961, right around the same time the Air Research engineers were pitching their turbine idea to the Speed Sport team, Grantham won at Phoenix Drag Strip with a run of 168.22 miles per hour at 9.04 seconds. The guy could drive. Garrett Air Research selected Grantham to campaign a second turbine car, one that was radically redesigned from the Speed Sport 4. Where the first car was essentially an adaptation of existing dragster technology, this new machine was purpose-built from the ground up for the turbine system. The numbers on Grantham's car are almost hard to believe. Without a driver, it weighed just 600 pounds. Compare that to the Speed Sport 4's 2,200 pounds at the start of the program, or even the 1,500-ish pounds after the tank swap. 600 pounds is nothing. That's lighter than some motorcycle setups. The changes went deeper than just weight reduction. Grantham's car used planetary gears instead of the chain drive system on the Speed Sport 4. The driver sat in a reclining posture like a modern Formula car, with the roll bar just 33 inches from the ground. The turbine spun even faster, 85,000 RPM compared to 70,000 on the first car. Out of the box, the second turbine car was a half-second faster than the Speed Sport 4 had ever run. Grantham was posting low 8-second elapsed times at 181 miles per hour. The math said 200 miles per hour was achievable. The team's goal was to break into the 7-second bracket and crack 200 by the end of 1963. For my money, this is where the program was at its most promising. You've got a 600-pound car, turbines spinning at 85,000 RPM, a proven driver, and a corporate sponsor with deep pockets. They'd already shown that the technology worked. Now they just needed to push it further. And then everything fell apart. What happened next is where the historical record gets a little fuzzy. The sources I found show a date of July 21, 1962, but the timeline suggests this might have actually occurred in 1963. Either way, the event itself is documented. During a run at Fontana Raceway in California, one of the turbines on Grantham's car exploded. Now, when you're talking about turbines spinning at 85,000 RPM, an explosion isn't like an engine scattering. The forces involved are in a completely different league. Shrapnel from the disintegrating turbine injured a young spectator who was hospitalized. The injuries weren't life-threatening, thank God, but the damage was done. Fontana banned the car immediately. Other California tracks followed. Word spread and track operators across the country stopped booking exhibition runs for the turbine cars. Nobody wanted to be the next Fontana. Garrett Air Research, facing negative publicity and potential liability, pulled all funding. Just like that, the program was dead. Here's what kills me about this whole thing. The turbine explosion at Fontana was a mechanical failure, sure, but mechanical failures happened all the time in drag racing. Engines scattered, cars caught fire, drivers got hurt. The sport wasn't exactly known for its safety record in 1962. But a turbine failure was different. It was unfamiliar. It was aerospace technology, not hot rod stuff. When a Hemi grenaded, people understood what had gone wrong. When a turbine spinning at 85,000 RPM came apart, that was something else entirely. The fear factor was higher, even if the actual danger wasn't necessarily worse than what happened every weekend at drag strips across the country. The corporate backing that had made the program possible in the first place also made it vulnerable. Garrett Air Research wasn't a racing operation that could shrug off bad press and keep going. They were an aerospace company with government contracts and a reputation to protect. One injured spectator was enough to shut everything down. But there was another factor that Greth talked about years later, and I think this one matters as much as the Fontana explosion. In a tribute published in the California Hot Rod Reunion Souvenir Program in 2007, Greth put it pretty simply. We knew from the start turbines wouldn't take off. There was no noise. Think about that. You've got a car that can run 189 miles per hour in the quarter mile, that's within striking distance of 200, that's using technology nobody else has figured out how to make work, and the guy who built it is saying from the beginning they knew it would never catch on because it was too quiet. Drag racing in 1962 wasn't just about speed, it was about spectacle. The thunderous roar of a blown Hemi on nitromethane, the flames shooting out of the headers, the ground shaking under your feet, that was the experience. The compressed air turbines ran nearly silent. No matter how fast they went, they couldn't give the crowd what the crowd came for. Greth understood something about the sport that pure engineering couldn't solve. Speed alone wasn't enough. You needed the noise. The Speed Sport team returned to conventional nitromethane-powered V8 dragsters in 1964. They went back to what worked, what people wanted to see, what made sense for a racing operation that needed to book shows and sell tickets. Dale Grantham's story after Fontana is harder to track down. There's an eyewitness account from Arizona Raceways in northwest Phoenix describing what might have been his final pass in the turbine car in 1963, but there's no record of him racing after that. At some point, and the timeline here is fuzzy, Grantham was injured in a racing wreck in a different car, something conventional rather than the turbine machine. During his recovery, his shop was broken into and looted. Whether the turbine car was taken during that break-in, nobody knows. Richard Dale Grantham died on April 8, 1972. He was just 40 years old. He's buried at Greenwood Memory Lawn Cemetery in Phoenix. The cause of his death isn't documented in any source I could find.
Now here's the part that really bothers me. Both turbine cars have completely vanished. The earlier Speed Sport Roadster, Old Noisy, the Hemi car that set the world record in 1957, that one survived. Don Garlitz found it as a bare frame and body and fully restored it. Today, it sits in the Garlitz Museum of Drag Racing in Ocala, Florida. Lyle Fisher apparently worked with the museum as a director at some point. But the turbine cars? Nothing. According to Haggerty Media, reporting as recently as December 2024, there is no indication of the fate of either air-powered dragster. A forum thread on the HAMB, the Jalopy Journal, titled First Turbine Dragster Speed Sport 4 Sought by Original Owners, indicates that Red Greth and the original crew have been actively looking for the car. They haven't found it. So you've got two machines that represented some of the wildest engineering in drag racing history that came within a whisker of breaking the 200-mile-per-hour barrier with technology nobody else was using, and they've just disappeared. Meanwhile, the conventional Hemi car sits restored in a museum. I want to take a minute here to put the Speed Sport program in context because these weren't the only people experimenting with turbine power in this era. Understanding who else was trying similar things helps you see what made the Arizona car special. Walt Arfons, you've probably heard the name, introduced the first jet engine dragster on August 6, 1960. By summer of 1961, he was running mid-sevens. But Arfons' car was a thrust vehicle, pushing air out the back, pure spectacle. His half-brother Art Arfons later built Green Monster 19 in 1971, which was a true turbine dragster powered by a GE T-58 helicopter turboshaft engine. That car toured IHRA events because, as Art put it, the NHRA would never allow turbines to race. Romeo Palamedes out of Oakland built the Untouchable jet car series. Bob Smith drove one of those to 287.704 miles per hour on January 13, 1963. Again, thrust propulsion, not wheel drive. Jim Busby and Fling Trailer built US Turbine 1, a 900-horsepower true turbine dragster that reached 192 miles per hour. That's closer to what the Speed Sport team was doing, mechanical drive to the wheels through reduction gears. And then there was Gene Middlebrooks and Turbonique, which is a whole rabbit hole I won't go down today, except to say the guy was selling mail-order rocket and turbine products, including something called the drag axle that supposedly made 1,300 horsepower for $4,695. The NHRA eventually banned Turbonique equipment, and Middlebrooks ended up convicted of mail fraud. That's a story for another time. The distinction between true turbines and jet cars matters, and it's something you guys understand.
The Speed Sport 4 and Grantham's car were true turbines. They mechanically drove the rear wheels through gears, just like a conventional dragster. The turbine was the engine, not a rocket motor strapped to a frame. That made them more advanced than the thrust-based jets that became exhibition staples. It also made them direct competitors with top fuel cars rather than sideshow attractions. They had to hook up. They had to put power to the ground. They had to deal with traction and chassis dynamics, not just point in a straight line and light the afterburner. That's why the performance numbers are so impressive. Running low 8s at 181 miles per hour, hitting 189 miles per hour at Cordova, those numbers came from a car that actually drove the quarter mile the same way everybody else did. The technology was exotic, but the challenge was the same. So why did turbines fail where piston engines succeeded? There were real mechanical reasons beyond the noise issue Greth talked about. Throttle lag was a killer. The STP turbine car that nearly won the Indy 500 in 1967 reportedly had 3 to 6 seconds of throttle lag. When you're drag racing, you need instant response. You can't wait 3 seconds for the power to come up. The speed sport cars worked around this by using compressed air rather than combustion turbines, which gave better throttle response, but the basic problem remained. No engine braking either. Unlike piston engines, turbines don't slow the car when you back off the throttle. Everything had to be done with brakes and parachutes. That's manageable, but it's one more thing that made the cars different from what drivers were used to. The extreme RPM numbers meant massive reduction gearing. You can't put 85,000 RPM directly to the wheels. Getting that down to usable wheel speeds meant complex gear systems that added weight and potential failure points. Heat management was brutal. That 1,300-degree combustor air had to go somewhere that wasn't the driver, the tires, or the structure. Every run was a fight against the heat. And then there was regulatory opposition. The NHRA had already banned jet cars in November 1961. Turbine dragsters faced similar hostility from sanctioning bodies that didn't know how to classify them or what rules should apply.
Now, I've got to be honest with you about what we don't know, because the historical record has some real gaps here. The exact date of the Fontana explosion is uncertain. Sources show July 21, 1962, but the development timeline suggests it might have occurred in 1963. The specific magazine issues that covered the program beyond the October 1962 Drag News interview are hard to pin down. I couldn't find complete crew rosters for either car beyond the core names. The cause of Dale Grantham's death in 1972 isn't documented anywhere I could find. Whether the turbine car was among the items stolen during his shop break-in is unknown. Where either car ended up after the program shut down is a complete mystery. What we know for certain is that both cars existed, both ran the numbers documented, and both disappeared without a trace. The people who built them have been looking for decades. As of late 2024, nobody's found anything. Here's my take on why this story matters. The Speed Sport 4 and Dale Grantham's turbine car represent drag racing's road not taken. In 1962 and 1963, there was a brief window where compressed air turbine technology looked like it might be the next big thing. The performance was there, the engineering was sound, corporate backing was in place. A 600-pound car running low 8s at 181 miles an hour, built by aerospace professionals and proven racers, that should have been the future. Instead, one explosion and the problem of spectacle killed the whole program. The conventional cars kept getting faster. Top fuel evolved into what it is today. The turbine experiment became a footnote. For the guys who were around in 1962, who might have seen one of these cars run at Cordova or Phoenix or Fontana before the explosion, this is a memory that probably feels unreal. Did that actually happen? Did somebody really build a compressed air dragster that almost hit 200 miles an hour? Yes, they did, and then it vanished. For everybody else, this is a reminder that drag racing in the early 60s was wild in ways that are hard to imagine now. People were trying everything. Jet thrust, turbine drive, compressed air. If it made power, somebody bolted it to a chassis and took it to the strip. Most of those experiments failed. A few of them changed everything, and some of them, like the Speed Sport 4, came heartbreakingly close to working before circumstances shut them down.
So, that's the whole strange story of drag racing's compressed air turbine experiment. 2 Arizona cars, 3 aircraft starter turbines, 85,000 RPM, 189 miles an hour at Cordova, and then nothing. A spectator injury at Fontana, a corporate sponsor walking away, and silence. Literally, the silence that Red Greth knew from the beginning would keep turbines from ever catching on. If any of you were at Cordova in July of '62, or Phoenix, or Fontana, before everything went south, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Drop whatever you remember. These cars don't exist anymore, except in stories, and every story matters. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more drag racing history, and I'll see you in the next one.